If there is a dignity in wildlife relocation, I have yet to find it. Most people assume my job involves majestic interactions with nature, releasing eagles back into the blue Kansas sky, or guiding a lost deer back to the forest. In reality, my job usually involves me, covered in cobwebs and insulation, negotiating with a creature that eats garbage and has thumbs. Today, the creature was a 30-pound raccoon I'd affectionately named Satan's Whiskers, and he was currently winning the turf war for the chimney of the Vanderhoven estate in East Wichita. "Come on, you masked bandit," I grunted, wedging my boot against the red brick of the chimney stack. The sun was beating down on the roof with that particular Wichita intensity that makes you feel like an ant under a magnifying glass. I was sweating in places that shouldn't sweat. My red curls, usually a manageable bob, had expanded in the humidity until I resembled a distressed clown. "Varmint Valet's, we park your pests." "Somewhere else," I muttered my tagline under my breath, wiping a smudge of soot from my nose. Right now, the only thing getting parked is my butt on these scorching shingles. I lunged with the catch-pole. Satan's Whiskers hissed, a sound like a deflating tire, and scrambled higher up the flue. I adjusted my grip. I'm 5'2" on a good day, and this chimney was built for giants. I stretched, my boots slipping on the grit of the roof shingles. Just a little more. I leaned out, overextending my center of gravity, which is a nice way of saying I did something incredibly stupid. The catch-pole looped around the raccoon. Success! But as I pulled back, triumph surging through my chest, the heel of my boot caught a loose shingle. Gravity, my oldest and most reliable enemy, took the wheel. I didn't fall off the roof. That would have been tragic. No. I slipped down the pitch of the roof, and my heavy canvas utility belt, specifically the loop holding my industrial flashlight, snagged on the ornate, iron-wrought lightning rod protruding from the atoms. The jerk halted my descent abruptly. The catch-pole clattered to the ground below. The raccoon, sensing the shift in power dynamics, scampered off across the roofline, chittering what I can only assume were insults about my mother. And there I hung, like a devastatingly uncool Christmas ornament. I was suspended 4 feet from the gutter, legs dangling uselessly, held up entirely by the durability of a leather belt and the structural integrity of my denim shorts. The fabric dug into my hips, cutting off circulation and dignity in equal measure. "Okay, Sam," I said to myself, my voice vibrating against the hot shingles. Assess. Adapt. Overcome. I tried to reach behind me to unhook the belt. My arms were too short. I tried to swing my legs to find purchase. I just spun slowly in the breeze, staring at the manicured lawn 20 feet down. I hung there for 5 minutes. The blood was rushing to my head. My phone was in my back pocket, buzzing against my numb butt cheek. I managed to shimmy my hand down, pinching my fingers into the denim, and fished it out. I didn't call the fire department. I called my mom. She didn't answer. I called my best friend, Lacey. Voicemail. Finally, I sighed, a long, rattling sound of defeat. I dialed 911. 911. What is your emergency? "Hi," I said, trying to sound professional. "This is Samantha Malloy with Varmint Valet. I'm currently secured to the roof of 412 Maple Street. I'm not injured, but I am, strictly speaking, stuck, like a fly on flypaper. But heavier." 7 minutes later, the wail of a siren cut through the suburban quiet. A massive red engine turned the corner, looking oversized on the residential street. Great. I didn't just get a ladder truck, I got the whole cavalry. The truck hissed to a halt. Men in turnout gear hopped out. And then he stepped out of the passenger side. From my elevated vantage point, the first thing I noticed was the shoulders. They were broad, filling out the navy blue t-shirt in a way that suggested the fabric was holding on for dear life. He looked up, shielding his eyes against the sun. Even from 20 feet away, the impact of his gaze hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. He walked toward the house, his stride eating up the distance. He wasn't rushing. He moved with a fluid, terrifying competence. He looked up at me, a slow grin spreading across a face that was far too handsome for a Tuesday afternoon in Kansas. "Varmint Valet?" he called up. His voice was deep, a baritone rumble that I felt in my toes, which were currently tingling from lack of blood flow. "That's me," I squeaked. I cleared my throat. I was inspecting the structural integrity of the lightning rod. "It passed," he chuckled. It was a low, scratchy sound that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. "Good to know. You planning on coming down anytime soon? Or is this a permanent installation?" "I'm weighing my options," I shot back, though the effect was ruined by my legs kicking uselessly at the air. He turned to his crew. "Grab the 24-footer. And a harness." He looked back at me. "Don't go anywhere. I'll try to restrain myself." He climbed the ladder moments later. As his head crested the roofline, the air shifted. He smelled of wood smoke, rain, and something uniquely male: clean sweat and hot skin. It wasn't a cologne. It was just him. He climbed until he was eye level with my waist, which was an incredibly intimate introduction. "Hi," he said. His eyes were dark brown, like coffee without cream, and they were crinkled at the corners with amusement. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow, giving him a rough, slightly dangerous look that made my breath hitch in my throat. "Hi," I whispered. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and it wasn't just from the fear of falling. "I'm Keaton," he said, reaching out one large, gloved hand to steady my hip. The contact was electric. Even through the thick canvas of his glove and my denim shorts, I felt a jolt of heat that had nothing to do with the sun. It zapped straight to my core, a heavy, liquid pull that made my mouth go dry. "Sam," I managed. "I usually make a better first impression. I can juggle. I'll keep that in mind." He maneuvered closer. "Okay, Sam, I'm gonna grab your belt. I need you to go limp. Don't fight me. Going limp. My specialty." He wrapped an arm around my waist. His forearm was hard as iron, corded with muscle that shifted under his skin as he took my weight. He was incredibly strong. Functional strength, honed by hauling hoses and axes, not vanity muscles from a gym. He lifted me effortlessly, unhooking my belt from the lightning rod with his other hand. For a moment, I was pressed flush against him on the ladder, my chest against his shoulder, my thighs brushing his. The heat coming off him was intoxicating. I could see the pulse beating in his neck, the fine grain of stubble on his jaw. The attraction was visceral, a sudden, overwhelming hunger that made me want to bury my face in the crook of his neck and inhale. He looked at me, his face inches from mine, his pupils dilated, swallowing the brown. He felt it too. I saw the sudden tension in his jaw, the way his breath hitched for a fraction of a second. The air between us crackled, thick and heavy. "Gotcha," he murmured, his voice rougher than before. "Yeah, I breathed. You got me." He guided me onto the ladder, keeping his body caged around mine until I had solid footing, and grabbing my keychain from the gutter where it had fallen on our way down. We descended slowly, his chest brushing my back with every step. It was torture. It was fantastic. When my boots hit the grass, my legs turned to jelly. I stumbled, and Keaton's hands were there instantly, gripping my upper arms to steady me. His grip was firm, possessive. My hands landed on his chest, feeling the hard wall of muscle beneath the cotton. "Easy," he said, not letting go. He was looking down at me, his gaze dropping to my lips before snapping back to my eyes. The sexual tension was a physical weight, pressing down on us. I wanted to lean in. I wanted to see if he tasted like the danger he promised. "Sam!" The voice cut through the moment like a circular saw hitting a nail. The spell shattered. Keaton's hands loosened, though he didn't step away. I closed my eyes for a brief second, praying for a sinkhole to open up and swallow me whole. I knew that voice. It was the voice of a man who color-coded his sock drawer and thought spicy mayonnaise was adventurous. I turned. Paul Williams was marching up the driveway, his loafers crunching on the gravel. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my van, and his face was twisted in that familiar expression of disappointed concern. "Paul," I said, stepping out of Keaton's orbit. The loss of Keaton's heat was immediate and jarring. "What are you doing here?" "I saw the fire truck," Paul said, ignoring Keaton entirely to focus his laser beam disapproval on me. "I was driving by to check on the rental property down the street, and I saw the truck. I knew it had to be you." "It's always you, Sam." "It's not always me," I defended, crossing my arms over my chest. I suddenly felt very small and very dirty. Statistically, it's rarely me. Paul reached out and picked a piece of soot from my shoulder, his touch light and irritating. "Look at you. You're a mess. Hanging off a roof? Really? We talked about this. You're 32 years old, Samantha. When are you going to stop playing with animals and get a real career?" I felt the familiar burn of humiliation behind my eyes. Paul had a gift for making me feel like an unruly teenager. "It is a real career, Paul. People pay me. It's a service. It's a hazard," Paul snapped. "And it's embarrassing. I have a reputation in this town, and having my ex-fiancé known as the raccoon girl, who needs the fire department to get her down from a roof, isn't helping." I opened my mouth to retort, to tell him that since he was the ex-fiancé, my reputation was no longer his concern, but a shadow fell over us. Keaton stepped up beside me. He didn't say anything aggressive, he just stood there, crossing those massive arms over his chest. He loomed over Paul, radiating a silent, calm menace. The contrast was stark. Paul in his tailored suit versus Keaton in his gear, smelling of smoke and capability. She was doing a job, Keaton said. His tone was easy, but there was steel underneath. Accidents happen. She handled it fine. Paul looked up at Keaton, blinking. He seemed to realize for the first time that he was standing next to a man who could likely bench press Paul's Honda Civic. "This is a private conversation," Paul said, though his voice wavered slightly. "Actually," Keaton drawled, "it's a public sidewalk. And you're shouting." I looked up at Keaton, surprised. He didn't know me. He had no reason to step into the swamp of my personal drama. But there he was, a solid wall between me and Paul's criticism. Paul scoffed, adjusting his tie. He turned back to me, his eyes pleading in that manipulative way that used to work. "Sam, please. Just sell the van. I know a guy at the insurance firm who's hiring. Steady hours, air conditioning, no rabies. I'm just trying to look out for you. You know I still care." "If you cared," I said, my voice steadier now, bolstered by the warm presence beside me, "you'd accept that I'm happy. Even when I'm hanging off a roof. Go away, Paul." Paul's jaw tightened. He looked from me to Keaton, assessing the situation. He realized he was outgunned. "Fine," Paul spat. "Call me when you come to your senses, or when you break a leg." He spun on his heel and stormed back to his car. I watched him go, the knot of tension in my stomach slowly uncoiling. "Friendly guy," Keaton noted dryly. "A real ray of sunshine," I agreed. I turned to look at him. "Thank you for the rescue, and for the backup." Keaton looked down at me. The amusement was back in his eyes, but the intensity was there too. He stripped off his heavy gloves, stuffing them into a pocket. His hands were large, rough-skinned, and bare. "All in a day's work, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. It makes me feel like I should be baking cookies." He smirked. "All right, Sam, I'm Keaton. I know. You told me on the roof. Just making sure the lack of oxygen didn't mess with your memory." He held my gaze for a beat too long. The air around us grew thin again. He reached out, and for a second I thought he was going to touch my face. My breath caught. Instead, he plucked a small, terrified spider from my collar. "Passenger," he said, flicking it onto the grass. "Right, thanks." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Load up," the fire captain yelled from the truck. Keaton didn't look away. "Be careful up there, Sam. I can't be around to catch you every time." "I don't need catching," I lied. "Everyone needs catching sometimes." His voice dropped an octave, vibrating through my chest. He winked, actually winked, and turned, jogging back to the truck. I watched him go. I watched the way his gear moved with him, the confident set of his shoulders. I watched him hop onto the truck and hang off the side as it pulled away. As they drove off, he looked back, holding my gaze until the truck turned the corner. My knees finally gave out, and I sat down hard on the curb. "Holy buckets," I whispered to the grass. My body was humming, every nerve ending, firing at once. I felt like I'd stuck a fork in a toaster. I sat there for 5 minutes, trying to reorganize my brain. Raccoon. Roof. Keaton. Paul. Keaton's eyes. Keaton's arms. I shook my head, slapping my cheeks to wake up. "Work, Sam. Focus." I stood up, brushed off the seat of my shorts, and walked to my van. The Varmint Valet logo on the side looked a little dusty, but I patted it affectionately. I climbed into the driver's seat, the interior baking hot. I tossed my utility belt down onto the passenger floorboard and turned the key. The engine sputtered to life. I checked my rearview mirror to fix my hair, and that's when I saw it. Sitting in the back of the van, perched atop a stack of cages, was Satan's Whiskers, the raccoon I had been trying to catch, the raccoon that had supposedly run away. He was sitting there, holding a half-eaten granola bar that I had left on the dashboard earlier. He stared at me. I stared at him. He took a bite of the granola bar, chewing slowly, his black eyes unblinking. "You have got to be kidding me," I said. The raccoon didn't answer. He just finished the bar and began to rummage through my box of invoices. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel. I had the raccoon. I had a bruised ego. And somewhere in this van, I realized with a sudden jolt of panic, I did not have my keys to the cages. I looked at the empty ignition ring. The van key was there. The cage keys, however, were currently with a very handsome firefighter who had saved my life and stolen my ability to form coherent sentences. I looked back at the raccoon. He looked ready to drive if I wasn't. "Well," I muttered, putting the van in gear, "this is going to be an interesting afternoon." Driving a cargo van is usually a solitary experience, mostly involving bad radio reception and the lingering scent of whatever critter I had last evicted. Driving a cargo van with a 30-pound raccoon riding shotgun, uncaged, and judging my driving skills, was an entirely different level of stress. Satan's whiskers had migrated from the dashboard to the passenger seat. He sat there on his haunches, his little bandit hands deftly sorting through my glove box contents like a disgruntled auditor looking for tax fraud. "Hey," I snapped, swerving slightly as I took a corner too fast. "Those are wet wipes. Do not eat the wet wipes." The raccoon paused, a packet of lemon-scented wipes clutched in his paws. He looked at me, looked at the packet, and then deliberately ripped it open with his teeth. "Fantastic," I muttered, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "Just make yourself at home. Maybe adjust the lumbar support while you're at it." I was currently navigating the streets of Wichita with the focus of a bomb disposal technician. My destination was Fire Station 9. I knew the number because I'd stared at the gold decal on the side of the massive truck that had rescued me less than an hour ago. I also knew where it was because, in my line of work, you tend to memorize the locations of emergency services, mostly so you know how far away help is when a badger decides to crawl up your pant leg. The issue wasn't just the loose wildlife. It was the keys. Specifically, the ring of keys that unlocked the reinforced steel cages currently stacked in the back of my van. Without them, Satan's whiskers wasn't going into a cage, which meant I couldn't release him into the wild, which meant he was currently my co-pilot indefinitely. And those keys were currently attached to the belt loop of Keaton Rhodes. Just thinking the name caused a strange, heavy thrumming sensation in my lower abdomen. It was irritating. I didn't have time for thrumming. I had a business to run and a raccoon that was currently trying to shove a tire pressure gauge into his mouth. "Drop it," I commanded. Satan's whiskers dropped it. On the floorboard, right under the brake pedal. "You are actively trying to kill us," I told him, reaching down blindly to swat the metal stick away while keeping my eyes on the road. I pulled into the apron of the fire station 5 minutes later. The building was a beautiful brick structure with large bay doors that were currently open to let in the summer breeze. And there, in the center of the driveway, was the truck. And there was Keaton. I slammed the van into park, making sure the raccoon didn't fly into the windshield, and just sat there for a moment. My breath hitched, lodging itself somewhere in my throat. He was washing the truck. It was a cliché so potent, it should have been illegal. He had shed the heavy turnout gear, abandoning the navy t-shirt he'd worn earlier for a gray tank top that had seen better days. He was soaking wet. Water from the hose darkled the gray fabric, plastering it to his torso like a second skin. He was scrubbing a wheel well with a long-handled brush, the motion causing the muscles in his back and shoulders to bunch and release in a mesmerizing rhythm. His biceps were corded with thick veins that stood out against his tan skin, and his forearms. Good grief. The forearms were dusted with dark hair and dripping with suds. I felt a sudden, sharp pull in my gut, a visceral yank that had nothing to do with gravity. It was a hunger, plain and simple. I watched a droplet of water run down his neck, tracing the line of his spine before disappearing beneath the damp cotton of his shirt. My mouth went dry. It was like looking at a hydration commercial, if the beverage being sold was pure, unfiltered testosterone. "Focus, Samantha," I hissed to myself. Keys. Raccoon. Dignity. I glanced at the passenger seat. Satan's whiskers was now licking the dashboard. "Stay," I ordered, pointing a finger at him. "Don't touch anything. Don't look at anything. If you find a stash of emergency gummy bears, they are mine." I hopped out of the van, slamming the door shut. I smoothed down my denim shorts, which still felt gritty from the roof shingles, and tried to fluff my flattened curls. It was a lost cause. I looked like I'd been tumbled in a dryer with a bag of charcoal. I walked up the driveway, my boots scuffing on the concrete. Keaton didn't hear me at first over the hiss of the hose. I stopped 10 feet away, just watching him. The man moved with a careless, powerful grace. He wasn't performing. He was just working, and that made it infinitely more dangerous to my equilibrium. He turned to dunk the brush in a bucket of soapy water and spotted me. He froze. Then, slowly, that devastating grin spread across his face. He straightened up, wiping a wet hand on his thigh, which only drew my attention to the way his uniform pants hugged his quadriceps. "Well," his voice rumbled, deep and amused, "if it isn't the girl on the roof." "I have a name," I said, trying to sound authoritative but sounding mostly breathless. "And I'm usually on the ground." "Usually," he agreed. He dropped the brush in the bucket and walked toward me. The air between us seemed to thicken, charged with static. As he got closer, the scent of him hit me, and it was intoxicating. It triggered a primitive response in my brain that suggested I should stop talking and start climbing him like the tree I should have climbed instead of the roof. He stopped 2 feet away. It was too close. It wasn't close enough. "You forget something?" he asked, his dark eyes dancing. He dragged his gaze down my body, lingering on the smudge of soot on my knee before traveling back up to my lips. The look felt like a physical touch, a warm thumb brushing against my skin. "I did," I said, my voice dropping to a huskier register than I intended. "You have my keys." Keaton blinked, then patted his hip. A metallic jingle answered him. "Ah," he said. "So I do. I thought that was just the sound of my magnetic personality." "Your personality is very quiet," I countered, taking a step forward. "My keys, on the other hand, are essential for my livelihood." He hooked a thumb into his belt loop. The clip was right there, resting against the sturdy fabric of his pants, perilously close to, well, the danger zone. "You want them?" he asked, his voice low, vibrating through the small space between us. "I need them. Come and get them." It was a challenge. A playful, dangerous challenge. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at his face, searching for mockery, but found only heat. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing the brown irises. He wasn't just teasing. He was flirting. Hard. I stepped into his space. The heat radiating off him was immense. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly. I had to get close to his hip to work the clip. I leaned in, the top of my head brushing his chin. I fumbled with the clasp. My knuckles grazed the hard ridge of his hip bone. I heard his breath hitch, a sharp, sudden intake of air. I looked up. His face was inches from mine. I could see the golden flecks in his eyes, the tiny scar that cut through his eyebrow. The tension was a living thing, winding around us, pulling us together. I wanted to lean forward. I wanted to taste the water droplets on his neck. I wanted to know if his mouth was as firm and demanding as the rest of him looked. "Sam," he whispered. The way he said my name, like it was a secret he'd been keeping, made my knees weak. "Keaton?" I breathed back. His hand moved, fingers hovering near my waist, as if he were about to pull me flush against him. The anticipation was agonizing, a sweet, sharp ache in the center of my chest. Honk. The sound was deafening. It wasn't a polite toot. It was the sustained, blaring horn of a Ford Econoline van, being assaulted from the inside. We sprang apart like guilty teenagers. I spun around. Through the windshield of my van, I could see Satan's whiskers. He was standing on the driver's seat, both paws pressed firmly against the center of the steering wheel, staring at us with wide, chaotic eyes. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The raccoon, seemingly encouraged by the noise, started bouncing. With every bounce, the horn blared. Honk, honk, honk. "Is that—" Keaton squinted, stepping up beside me. "Is that the prisoner?" "He's not a prisoner," I said, panic rising in my throat. "He's a client. And he's currently hijacking my vehicle." As if on cue, the raccoon scrambled over the steering wheel and hit the door lock. The distinct thwomp of the locks disengaging echoed across the parking lot. "He unlocked it," Keaton said, sounding impressed. "He has thumbs," I wailed. "I told you, he has thumbs." The driver's side door, which I evidently hadn't latched fully in my haste, popped open. Satan's whiskers tumbled out onto the concrete, did a somersault that would have scored a perfect 10 in gymnastics, and took off running, straight into the open bay of the fire station. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I yelled, sprinting after him. "Hey!" Keaton shouted, right on my heels. "Wait up!" I didn't wait. I chased the furry delinquent into the cavernous garage. The station was huge, filled with racks of gear, hoses, and another smaller ambulance. "Here, kitty, kitty!" I called out, immediately regretting it. Here, Trash Panda. "Probably don't insult him," Keaton said, appearing beside me. He didn't look winded. He looked like he was having the time of his life. He looks sensitive. "He's a menace," I said, scanning the shadows. "Where did he go?" A clatter of metal from the far corner answered me. We both turned. Satan's whiskers was scaling a rack of turnout gear. He had reached the top shelf and was currently trying on a helmet. "That's Johnson's helmet," Keaton said. "He's not going to like that. He has lice paranoia." "I need a ladder," I said, adrenaline spiking. "Or a net. Do you have a net?" "We're a fire station, Sam, not SeaWorld. We have axes and hoses." "Okay, don't axe the raccoon. Please." Keaton chuckled, that low sound that vibrated in my bones. "I'll try to restrain myself. You go left, I'll go right. We'll flank him." We moved in. I crept toward the rack, making soft, soothing noises that I hoped sounded like, I have delicious garbage for you, and not, I'm going to put you in a cage. Satan's whiskers watched us, the oversized helmet wobbling on his head. He looked like a very small, very hairy firefighter. Easy now, Keaton murmured, moving with surprising stealth for a man of his size. He was close enough to grab the raccoon. I lunged. Satan's whiskers was faster. He launched himself off the shelf, sailing through the air like a furry projectile. He landed on Keaton's chest. Keaton grunted, stumbling back. His arms instinctively came up to catch the creature. For a second, they did a clumsy waltz, Keaton holding a raccoon, the raccoon holding onto Keaton's tank top for dear life. Then the claws came out. Ow! Hey! Keaton yelped, trying to detach the animal without hurting it. The raccoon scrambled up, using Keaton like a tree. He crested Keaton's shoulder and leaped, landing on the hood of the chief's shiny red SUV parked in the corner. Oh no, Keaton groaned. Not the chief's ride. He waxes that thing with the diaper. The raccoon began to slide down the hood, claws scrabbling for purchase, leaving fine, white scratches in the clear coat. I didn't think. I just reacted. I dove. I tackled the raccoon just as he hit the bumper. We went down in a heap of limbs and fur. I managed to get a grip on the scruff of his neck, the only safe way to hold a raccoon without losing a finger, and pinned his rear end with my hip. Gotcha, I shrieked, breathless. I was lying on the concrete floor of a fire station, wrestling a wild animal. My shirt was riding up, my face was pressed against a tire, and I was pretty sure I had raccoon dander in my mouth. Nice form, a voice said from above. I looked up. Keaton was standing over me, hands on his hips. He was grinning down at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The water on his shirt had dried slightly, but he still looked damp and delicious. Are you going to help? I panted, blowing a curl out of my eyes. Or are you just enjoying the view? Little bit of both, he admitted. He crouched down. All right, let's get this guy secure before he decides to drive the ambulance. Together, we managed to march Satan's whiskers back to the van. It was an intimate struggle. Keaton's large hands over mine to keep the raccoon steady, his chest bumping my shoulder, his breath warm on my ear as he maneuvered around the van door. Finally, with a metallic clang, I shoved the raccoon into the cage and locked it. I leaned against the side of the van, sliding down until I hit the pavement. My heart was racing, a frantic drum solo against my ribs. It was partly the exertion, partly the adrenaline, but mostly it was the man standing next to me. Keaton leaned against the van beside me. So, he said, looking down at me. Is every day like this with you? Only the Tuesdays, I said, closing my eyes for a second. Thursdays are usually reserved for skunks. He laughed. He reached out and, with a gentleness that belied his size, plucked a stray raccoon hair from my cheek. His knuckles lingered on my skin for a heartbeat too long. The heat flared again, sudden and consuming. I looked at him, and the air went thin. Here, he said softly. He unclipped the keys from his belt loop and held them out. I took them. Our fingers brushed, and a jolt of electricity zapped up my arm, settling heavy and hot in my chest. I stared at his hand. Large, scarred, capable. Thanks, I whispered. You know, he said, his voice dropping to that rough rumble that made my toes curl. You owe me. I do. Rescue from a roof. Retrieval of a fugitive raccoon. And I think I pulled a hamstring chasing that thing. He took a step closer, invading my personal space in the best way possible. He crowded me against the van, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. I looked up, meeting his gaze. His eyes were dark, serious, and filled with a hunger that matched my own. I was thinking dinner, he said. My heart skipped a beat. Dinner? Yeah. Food. Conversation. No raccoons. He smirked. Unless you bring them as a +1. I opened my mouth to say yes. To say absolutely. To say I would eat gas station sushi if it meant sitting across from him. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. Once. Twice. 3 times. I ignored it. Dinner sounds, I started. The phone buzzed again. A long, insistent vibration. You should probably get that, Keaton said, his eyes flicking to my pocket. Could be another emergency. Maybe a badger with a bazooka. I sighed, the magical tension deflating slightly. I pulled the phone out. The screen lit up with a photo I kept meaning to change. It was Paul. Paul, looking smug in a polo shirt. Text from Paul. I spoke to the insurance guy. He can see you tomorrow at 9. Don't be late. It's time to grow up, Sam. The bubble of desire popped, replaced by the cold, heavy weight of reality. My life was a mess. My van smelled like wet fur. My ex was still trying to manage my existence. And this man, this gorgeous, competent, heroic man, didn't need my chaos. I looked up at Keaton. He was watching me, reading the shift in my mood. The playfulness in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a steady, assessing look. "Trouble?" he asked. "Just reality," I said, shoving the phone back in my pocket. I pushed off the van, putting a foot of distance between us. I needed the distance. If I stayed close, I'd do something stupid like kiss him, and then I'd have to explain why my life was a dumpster fire. "Look, Keaton," I said, gripping the keys tight. I can't do dinner. Not right now, things are complicated." He didn't push. He didn't get offended. He just nodded slowly, though I saw the disappointment flicker in his eyes. "Complicated," he repeated. "Okay, complicated I can handle." "You say that now," I said, offering him a weak smile. "But you haven't seen me try to parallel park." He chuckled, but it was softer this time. "All right, Sam. Rain check then." "Rain check," I lied. I climbed into the driver's seat. The van felt emptier now, despite the angry raccoon in the back. I started the engine. Keaton stepped back, slapping the door panel twice. "Drive safe. And try to keep the wildlife inside the vehicle. I'll do my best." I put the van in reverse and backed out, watching him in the rearview mirror. He stood there in the middle of the driveway, hands in his pockets, wet shirt clinging to his chest, watching me go. He didn't move until I turned the corner. My chest ached. It was a physical pain, a tightness right behind my sternum. "You're an idiot, Samantha," I told the rearview mirror. From the back cage, Satan's whiskers let out a chittering noise. "Oh, shut up," I told him. "You don't know what you're talking about." I drove toward the highway, trying to ignore the lingering sensation of his fingers on my waist, and the sinking realization that I had just driven away from the most interesting thing to happen to me in a decade. 2 weeks passed at this pace, a blur of skunks, possums, and dodging Paul's phone calls. I threw myself into work, trying to scrub the memory of chocolate brown eyes out of my brain with manual labor. It didn't work. Every time I saw a fire truck, my heart did a traitorous little flip. And then, on a Tuesday, because the universe loves a theme, the phone rang. It wasn't Paul. It was Mrs. Adams, the librarian. "Sam, dear," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I think there's something in the return slot. And it's hissing at the patrons." I grabbed my keys. "I'm on my way." I didn't know it then, but parking my van in front of the library was about to set off a chain reaction that would make a roof rescue look like a spa day. Because parked right next to the library, hazards flashing, was a very familiar red SUV, and leaning against it was the chief. And standing next to him, holding a stack of books and looking like he just stepped out of my daydreams, was Keaton. I rested my head on the steering wheel. "Okay, universe," I muttered. "You win. Round 2. I opened the door and stepped out into the sunshine. Keaton looked up. He saw me, and the smile he gave me was like a match striking in a dark room. It was gonna be a long day. The universe didn't just have a sense of humor. It had a cruel slapstick streak that rivaled the Three Stooges. I sat in the driver's seat of the Varmint Valet van, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned the color of raw dough. Through the windshield, the scene unfolded like a slow-motion car crash I was obligated to participate in. The West Branch of the Wichita Public Library, a sanctuary of silence and air conditioning, was currently the backdrop for the return of my libido's public enemy number 1. Keaton Rhodes. He was standing on the sidewalk, the afternoon sun glinting off his dark hair. He wasn't wearing his turnout gear today. Instead, he wore a pair of dark jeans that fit him with criminal perfection and a navy button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows. The exposed forearms were tanned, dusted with dark hair, and roped with the kind of veins that suggested he could strangle a bear or open a pickle jar with equal efficiency. Standing next to him was a man who looked like he ate gravel for breakfast, Chief Miller. And standing next to the chief was Mrs. Adams, wringing her hands so hard I worried they might detach. I took a deep breath. The air in the van tasted like stale coffee and the vague muskiness of the skunk I'd relocated that morning. "You can do this, Sam," I told the dashboard. "It's just a job. He's just a guy. A guy with eyes the color of espresso and shoulders wide enough to land a plane on. But just a guy." I was lying to myself, and I wasn't even doing a good job of it. I hopped out of the van, my boots hitting the pavement with a heavy thud. I smoothed down my khaki cargo shorts, which were definitely not flattering but highly practical for wrestling rodents, and marched toward the group. Keaton saw me first. His head turned, and that slow, lazy grin spread across his face. It was a weaponized smile. It hit me right in the solar plexus, a physical jolt of heat that made my breath hitch. He didn't just look at me, he catalogued me. His gaze started at my boots, traveled up my legs, lingered for a dangerous second on my waist, and finally locked onto my eyes. The air between us instantly grew heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. "Varmint Valet to the rescue," Keaton said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the soles of my boots. "Keaton," I nodded, trying to keep my voice professional. It came out breathless. "Chief." "Mrs. Adams. I hear we have a literary critic in the return slot." Mrs. Adams looked like she was about to faint. "Oh, Samantha, it's horrible." I went to empty the bin and something hissed at me. It sounded like a demon. A very small, angry demon. "Probably just a critic of modern romance novels," I joked, pulling on my heavy leather gloves. Chief Miller grunted. He was a large man with a mustache that looked like a push broom. "We were just leaving after a safety inspection when Mrs. Adams flagged us down. Rhodes here insisted we wait for you, said you might need backup." I shot a look at Keaton. He was leaning against the library's brick wall, arms crossed over his chest. The fabric of his shirt strained across his biceps. He looked entirely too amused. "I heard you have a history of needing a spotter," Keaton drawled, his eyes dancing with mischief. "One time," I said, holding up a finger. "One time on a roof. And I had it under control." "You were dangling like a yo-yo, Sam. It was a tactical suspension." He laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to wrap around my spine. I had to physically stop myself from leaning toward him. The attraction was a living thing, a magnetic pull that made my brain fuzzy, and my palms sweat inside the leather gloves. "Right," I said, clearing my throat. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Mrs. Adams led us around the side of the building to the exterior book drop. It was a metal chute built into the brick wall. From inside the dark cavern of the slot, a low, guttural growl echoed. I shone my flashlight into the darkness. 2 glowing eyes reflected back, accompanied by a set of teeth that looked like a jagged mountain range. "Possum," I announced. "And a big one. He's wedged himself between the Grapes of Wrath and a biography of Winston Churchill." "Is he dangerous?" Mrs. Adams squeaked. "Only if you try to discuss politics with him," I said. "He's scared." He went in looking for food and got stuck. I retrieved my catch pole from the van. When I returned, Keaton had moved closer. He was standing right behind me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his body. He smelled of soap and fresh air, a clean, sharp scent that made my knees feel like water. "Need a hand?" he murmured, his voice right by my ear. I shivered. It was involuntary. "I've got it. I just need to open the access panel from the inside." We moved into the library. The interior was cool and smelled of old paper and floor wax. Mrs. Adams unlocked the small room behind the return slot. The metal bin was vibrating. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "Open the door, snare the beast, look cool in front of the HOT Firefighter." I unlatched the back of the bin. I expected the possum to be cowering in the corner. I did not expect it to launch itself at me like a furry cannonball. "Whoa!" I yelled, stumbling back. The possum, a grayish-white blur of anxiety, hit the floor running. It scrambled between my legs, hissing like a deflating tire, and bolted out the open door into the main library. "He's loose!" Mrs. Adams shrieked, climbing onto a stool with impressive agility for a woman of her age. "I'm on it!" I shouted, sprinting after the creature. "Flanking left!" Keaton yelled. We burst into the main reading room. Thankfully, it was a Tuesday afternoon, so the library was mostly empty, save for a few startled students and a man sleeping in the periodicals section. The possum was fast. It skittered across the linoleum, claws clicking, and dove into the fiction section, taking a sharp left at F. I rounded the corner, sliding slightly on the polished floor. Keaton was right beside me. He moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, his long legs eating up the distance. "He went under the shelving unit," I pointed. We skidded to a halt in aisle 4. The possum was huddled under the bottom shelf of the mystery section. "Okay," I panted, bracing my hands on my knees. "We have him cornered. I need to flush him out. You catch him." Keaton looked at me, his eyebrows raised. "I thought you were the professional." "I am delegating. It's a management technique." "Right, management." He smirked, and the sight of it made my heart hammer a double rhythm. Fear of the rodent, and a desperate need to kiss that smirk off his face. I lay down on my stomach, trying to angle the catchpole under the shelf. The floor was hard and cold. My shirt rode up, exposing the skin of my lower back to the air-conditioned chill. Suddenly, a warm, large hand settled on my lower back, pulling my shirt down. The touch was electric. It burned through my skin, sending shockwaves straight to my core. I froze. "Decent," Keaton murmured. He was crouching beside me, his face inches from mine. He wasn't looking at the possum. He was looking at me. The air in the aisle vanished, the silence of the library pressed in, amplifying the sound of my own ragged breathing. His hand lingered on my back, the heavy weight of his palm grounding me, claiming me. The heat from his body was overwhelming, a furnace blast against my side. "Sam," he whispered. His gaze dropped to my lips. I parted my mouth to speak, but my brain had short-circuited. I wanted him to kiss me. I wanted it more than I wanted air. I wanted to turn into him, to tangle my hands in that thick, dark hair and pull him down until there was no space left between us. Hiss. The possum, sensing our distraction, decided now was the time to strike. It lunged from beneath the shelf, snapping its jaws inches from my nose. I yelped and rolled away. Keaton reacted instantly. He lunged, not for the animal, but for me, shielding my body with his own. We tumbled backward, a tangle of limbs, until my back hit the shelving unit on the opposite side. Keaton landed on top of me. For a second, the world stopped. He was heavy, a solid wall of muscle pressing me into the metal shelf. His chest was heaving against mine. His legs were slotted between mine, his hips pressing firmly against me. The intimacy of it was staggering. I could feel every hard plane of his body, the rapid beat of his heart, thundering against my own. He braced his hands on the shelf on either side of my head, caging me in. His face was hovering over mine. So close our noses brushed. I inhaled sharply, filling my lungs with his scent. Clean cotton, warm skin, and pure male essence. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice rough, stripped of all humor. His eyes were scanning my face, frantic and fierce. "No," I breathed. "I'm fine." He didn't move. He didn't get off me. The adrenaline of the chase had morphed into something darker, heavier. The sexual tension was a physical weight, crushing and exquisite. I felt a pull deep in my belly, a liquid heat that pooled low and demanded attention. He shifted slightly, the friction of his body against mine, sending a jolt of pleasure so sharp I almost gasped. He felt it too. I saw the muscles in his jaw bunch, saw the way his throat worked as he swallowed. "Sam," he groaned, the sound vibrating against my chest. He lowered his head. His gaze was locked on my mouth. I lifted my chin, surrendering, inviting. Ahem. The sound was like a bucket of ice water. We both froze, slowly, painfully. Keaton pushed himself up, though he kept one hand on the shelf, keeping me pinned for a second longer, his eyes promising that this wasn't over. We looked up. Chief Miller was standing at the end of the aisle, holding the possum by the scruff of its neck. The animal was playing dead, tongue lolling out theatrically. "Got him," the chief said dryly, "while you two were inspecting the floor wax." Keaton pushed himself to his feet and then reached down, offering me a hand. I took it. His grip was firm, his palm rough and warm. He pulled me up effortlessly, but he didn't let go of my hand immediately. He squeezed it, a silent reassurance before releasing me. I smoothed my hair, my face burning hotter than a habanero pepper. "Good catch, Chief. Excellent technique." "I raised 3 daughters," the chief grunted, dropping the possum into my carry cage, which I had abandoned earlier. "Playing dead doesn't work on me." We walked out of the library in a daze. I secured the cage in the back of the van, my hands shaking slightly. I wasn't sure if it was from the adrenaline or the lingering phantom sensation of Keaton's body pressing against mine. When I turned around, Keaton was waiting for me. The chief had gone back to the SUV. Keaton stepped into my personal space. He didn't ask permission this time. He just invaded it, his presence encompassing my entire world. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice sounded wrecked. "Just another day at the office. Wildlife, humiliating falls, authoritative figures judging me." He reached out and tucked a curl of red hair behind my ear. His fingers grazed my jawline, leaving a trail of fire. "I wasn't judging you," he said softly. "You were laughing at me." "I was laughing because you're the most interesting thing that's happened in this town in 5 years. His thumb brushed my cheekbone, and because if I didn't laugh, I was going to do something unprofessional. My breath hitched. "Like what?" His eyes dropped to my mouth again, hungry and intense. Like Kiss You in the biography section, my heart did a traitorous flip-flop. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to grab his shirt and finish what we started in aisle 4. But then the ghost of Paul whispered in my ear, "He's a firefighter, Sam. A hero. You're the girl covered in raccoon dander. You're a mess." He'll realize it eventually. I took a half step back, breaking the contact. The loss of his touch was an immediate, physical ache. Keaton, I started, my voice trembling. I'm not good at this. Relationships, dating. I come with a lot of baggage, and most of it has sharp teeth. Keaton didn't back away. He stepped closer, eliminating the distance I'd tried to create. I deal with fires for a living, Sam, he said, his voice low and steady. I'm not afraid of a little heat. It's not just heat. It's chaos. My life is a disaster zone. Then let me take you to dinner, he said, tonight. No excuses, no rain checks. Just you, me, and food that hasn't been chewed on by a rodent. I looked up at him. He was solid. He was real. He was looking at me like I was the only person on the planet, despite the fact that I had dirt on my knees and probably smelled like fear and old books. The safe thing to do was say no. The Paul thing to do was to go home, organize my invoices, and eat a salad. But the way Keaton was looking at me made me want to be unsafe. Okay, I whispered. His face lit up. It wasn't a smug victory smile, it was genuine, blinding relief. Okay, but I have to go home and shower first. I refuse to smell like an opossum on a first date. I have standards. He chuckled, stepping back, but keeping his eyes locked on mine. 7 o'clock. I'll pick you up. What's your address? I told him. He put it in his phone, his fingers moving quickly. Don't be late, I said, trying to regain some semblance of control. I'm never late, he promised. He winked, a devastating gesture that should be illegal, and turned to walk toward the SUV. I watched him go, watching the muscles in his back shift under the shirt. I leaned against the van, my legs feeling like jelly. Oh boy, I muttered. I am in so much trouble. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting a text from Paul telling me he sensed a disturbance in the force of my singleness. It wasn't Paul. It was a notification from my bank. Overdraft alert. I sighed, staring at the screen. The reality of my life came crashing back down. I was broke, I was messy, and I had just agreed to go out with a man who looked like a calendar model. Future Sam's problem, I decided, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat. I climbed into the van. The possum in the back hissed at me. Yeah, I told him, putting the van in gear. You think you're trapped? You should see my heart right now. I pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic. For the first time in weeks, the knot of anxiety in my chest had loosened, replaced by a fluttering excitement that felt dangerously like hope. I checked the rearview mirror. The library faded into the distance, but the memory of Keaton's weight on top of me, the hard ridge of his hips, the heat of his breath, that wasn't fading. It was etched into my skin, tonight. 7 o'clock. I had 4 hours to turn myself from a wildlife wrangler into a woman worthy of Keaton Rhodes. I hit the gas. Challenge accepted. The transformation from raccoon wrangler to a woman capable of holding a conversation over a white tablecloth is a process that defies the laws of physics and possibly several Geneva Conventions. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection with the same level of scrutiny I usually reserved for a structural weakness in a possum-infested attic. The humidity in Wichita had declared war on my hair. My red bob, usually a manageable halo of curls, had expanded horizontally until I looked like I had stuck a fork in a toaster socket. Flatten, I commanded, attacking a particularly rebellious curl with a lethal amount of hairspray. Submit. It did not submit. It bounced back with a springy resilience that was frankly insulting. I checked the time on my phone. 6:45. I had 15 minutes to perform a miracle. I had already spent 40 minutes in the shower, scrubbing until my skin was pink, desperate to remove the phantom scent of possum fear and library dust. I smelled like lavender body wash now, a scent I hoped would override the odorant that seemed to be my signature perfume. I ran to the bedroom and faced the closet. It was a grim landscape of flannel, denim, and tactical cargo shorts. But in the back, shrouded in plastic like a museum artifact, was the dress. I pulled it out. It was a deep, emerald green wrap dress I had bought 3 years ago for a cousin's wedding and hadn't worn since. It was soft, silk-like material that didn't require ironing, my favorite quality in a garment. I shed my towel and shimmied into it. The fabric was cool against my skin, settling over my curves in a way that made me feel less like a tomboy and more like a woman who owned a matching set of luggage. It hugged my waist and flared slightly at the hips. I paired it with nude heels that I prayed I wouldn't twist an ankle in. A knock echoed from the front door. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it did a full gymnastics routine in my chest. He was early. Of course he was early. He was a firefighter. Punctuality was probably hardwired into his DNA, alongside bravery and the ability to look good in suspenders. I took one last deep breath, grabbed my purse, which was blessedly free of animal treats, and walked to the door. When I opened it, the air left my lungs in a rush. Keaton Rhodes was leaning against the doorframe. He had traded his uniform for a dark gray button-down shirt that fit him with criminal precision. The fabric strained across his broad shoulders and tapered down to a waist that I knew from recent, roof-related experience was hard as granite. He wore dark denim jeans and leather boots that looked worn but polished. He looked up from his watch, and the moment his eyes landed on me, everything shifted. He didn't smile immediately. Instead, he went still. His dark eyes widened, the pupils dilating until the brown was almost swallowed by black. He dragged his gaze from the hem of my dress up to my face, a slow, tactile inspection that felt like a caress. My skin heated under his regard, a flush rising from my chest to my neck. "Wow," he said. The word was rough, scraped from the bottom of his throat. "I clean up okay," I managed to say, my voice sounding breathy and foreign to my own ears. "It takes a lot of industrial solvents, but I get there." He finally smiled, that slow, dangerous grin that made my knees feel like overcooked pasta. He stepped forward, entering my personal space, bringing with him the scent of rain, crisp soap, and warm male skin. It was a heady combination that made my head spin. "You look incredible, Sam," he said softly. He reached out, his large hand hovering for a second before his knuckles grazed my cheek. The contact was electric. A jolt of pure heat zapped through me, settling heavy and liquid in my lower belly. I leaned into his touch instinctively, my eyes fluttering shut. "You don't look so bad yourself," I whispered. "No soot. I try to leave the soot at the station for special occasions." His thumb brushed my lower lip, sending a fresh wave of shivers down my spine. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be." He led me to a black pickup truck parked at the curb. He opened the passenger door for me, offering a hand to help me up. His grip was firm and warm, his palm rough against mine. As I climbed in, my dress rode up slightly, and I saw his gaze flicker to my legs before he politely looked away. The tension in the cab as he walked around to the driver's side was thick enough to chew on. We drove to a place called the Amber Room, an upscale bistro downtown that I had only ever seen from the outside while driving my van to extract bats from belfries. The interior was dim and intimate, with exposed brick walls and candles flickering on every table. We were seated in a booth near the back. As we settled in, Keaton's knee brushed against mine under the table. Neither of us moved away. That point of contact became the center of my universe, a burning anchor in the sea of white linen and silverware. "So," Keaton said, picking up the wine list but keeping his eyes locked on me, "tell me something I don't know. How does a girl like you end up chasing raccoons for a living?" I took a sip of water, trying to cool the heat in my face. It wasn't the original plan. I wanted to be a vet. But vet school is expensive, and I have a knack for being in the wrong place at the right time with wild animals. I saved a squirrel from a gutter once, and word got around. Suddenly, I was the neighborhood Dr. Dolittle, but with more scratches. He chuckled, the sound vibrating in the low light. "I can see that. You have a way with them, even if you do end up on the roof." Hey, the roof was a strategic error, a one-time thing. And the library? The library was an ambush. Possums are crafty. Our drinks arrived, and the conversation flowed easier than I expected. We talked about his time in the academy, my worst client, a woman who insisted her house was haunted by ghosts that turned out to be squirrels in the walls, and the best pizza in Wichita. With every minute, the pull between us grew stronger. It wasn't just the physical attraction, though that was undeniable. Every time he laughed, his eyes crinkling at the corners, I felt a tug in my chest. He was genuine. He listened when I spoke, watching my mouth with a focus that made it hard to remember what I was saying. We had just finished our appetizers when the atmosphere shifted. I felt it before I saw it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a cold prickle of warning that usually signaled a predator was nearby. Well, Samantha." The voice was like fingernails on a chalkboard. I froze, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. I closed my eyes for a brief second, praying that when I opened them, I would be hallucinating. I wasn't. Paul Williams stood by our table. He was wearing a beige suit that washed him out and a tie that cost more than my monthly rent. He looked pristine, polished, and utterly displeased. "Paul," I said, setting my fork down with a clatter. "What are you doing here?" "I'm having dinner with the partners," he said, gesturing vaguely to a large table across the room. His eyes scanned me, taking in the dress, the hair, the makeup. A flicker of something like possessiveness crossed his face, followed quickly by his trademark condescension. "You look different. I see you finally took my advice about dressing like an adult." My spine stiffened. "I dressed for myself, Paul. Not for you, and certainly not for your advice." Paul's gaze shifted to Keaton. He looked the firefighter up and down, sneering slightly at the open collar of Keaton's shirt. "And this is the ladder man?" Paul asked, a smirk curling his lip. "Did you save another cat, or is this a charity dinner?" The air at the table dropped 20 degrees. Keaton didn't stand up. He didn't need to. He simply leaned back in the booth, draped an arm over the back of the seat behind me, and leveled a stare at Paul that would have stopped a charging rhino. It was calm, deadly, and utterly terrifying. "The name is Keaton," he said, his voice low and devoid of the warmth he'd shown me all night. "And if you want to keep your teeth in that expensive smile, I suggest you walk away." Paul blinked, taken aback by the direct threat. He looked around nervously to see if his partners were watching. "There's no need for hostility. I'm just looking out for Sam. She has a tendency to make messy choices." "The only messy choice I see," Keaton said, his voice dropping an octave, "is you interrupting our dinner." I reached out and placed my hand over Keaton's forearm. His muscles were rock hard, coiled with tension beneath the cotton sleeve. "It's okay, Keaton. He's leaving." I looked at Paul. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the girl covered in mud. I felt the heat of Keaton's arm against my back, the solid weight of his support, and I felt angry. "Go eat your dinner, Paul," I said, my voice steady. "And stop worrying about my choices. I'm doing just fine." Paul opened his mouth to retort, looked at Keaton's dark, unblinking eyes, and thought better of it. He straightened his tie, gave a dismissive sniff, and turned on his heel. As he walked away, the adrenaline in my veins began to curdle into embarrassment. The romantic bubble had popped, replaced by the sharp, ugly reality of my past. "I'm sorry," I whispered, staring at the tablecloth. "He's a lot." Keaton shifted, turning his body toward me. He took my hand, his thumb rubbing circles into my palm. "Don't apologize for him. He's an idiot, a blind idiot, if he let you go." I looked up. The intensity in his gaze stole my breath. He didn't let me go. I left. He wanted me to be someone else. Someone who didn't smell like pine needles and skunk. "Good thing I like pine needles," Keaton murmured. He leaned in closer. The noise of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. All I could see were his eyes, golden flecks dancing in the brown. All I could feel was the heat radiating from his chest, pulling me in like a moth to a flame. "Let's get out of here," he said suddenly. "This place is too stiff. And the company over there," he jerked his head toward Paul, "is ruining my appetite. Where do you want to go?" "Anywhere, as long as it's just you and me." We paid the check in record time. Keaton refused to let me touch my wallet and practically escaped the restaurant. The night air was heavy and humid, but after the stifling tension inside, it felt amazing. We drove for a while in comfortable silence, the radio playing softly. Keaton drove one-handed, his other hand resting on the center console, inches from mine. Every time we hit a bump, his knuckles brushed my hand, sending fresh sparks through my nervous system. He pulled the truck into a scenic overlook near the river. It was deserted, the city lights reflecting off the black water below. He cut the engine, and silence descended, heavy and expectant. He turned in his seat to face me, unbuckling his seatbelt to get closer. The cab of the truck felt suddenly very small and very intimate. "Sam," he said, his voice husky. "Yeah? I've wanted to do this since I saw you hanging off that roof." He reached out, cupping my face in his large, warm hands. His thumbs traced my cheekbones, tilting my head up. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed in my ears. I parted my lips, a silent invitation. He didn't rush. He moved slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. But I didn't want to pull away. I wanted to merge with him. I wanted to climb into his skin. His mouth brushed mine, a feather-light touch that teased and promised. I gasped, my hands flying up to grip his shoulders. The cotton of his shirt was soft, the muscle beneath hard and unyielding. Then he kissed me for real. It wasn't a polite first-date peck, it was a claiming. His lips were firm and demanding, moving against mine with a hunger that matched my own. He tasted of red wine and desire. I opened for him, deepening the kiss until the world spun away. My fingers tangled in the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. A groan vibrated in his chest, a low, primal sound that fueled the fire burning in my belly. His hand slid down my back, pressing me against the seat, his other hand gripping my waist to anchor me. The heat was overwhelming. It was visceral, a desperate need that clawed at my insides. I forgot about Paul. I forgot about the overdraft fees. I forgot about the raccoons. There was only Keaton. The rough slide of his stubble against my chin, the crushing weight of his mouth, the scent of him filling my lungs. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against mine, both of us panting for air. His eyes were dark pools of want. "You," he rasped, his voice wrecked, "are dangerous. I come with warning labels," I whispered, my lips tingling. "I ignore labels." He moved to kiss me again, his hand sliding up my thigh, his thumb pressing into the sensitive skin there. My body arched toward him, every nerve ending screaming for more. Buzz, buzz, buzzzzz. The sound was jarring, a mechanical intrusion that shattered the moment like glass. We froze. My phone, sitting in the cup holder between us, was vibrating violently against the plastic. "Ignore it," Keaton murmured, nuzzling my neck. "It might be the library again," I gasped, though my brain was currently mush. "Buzz." I sighed, a long, ragged sound of frustration. "I have to check. It's the emergency line." I picked up the phone. It wasn't the library. It was a notification from the frantic homeowner on Elm Street, followed by 3 missed calls I hadn't heard over the blood rushing in my ears. Text. "It's in the house. The skunk is in the kitchen. Please help," I groaned, dropping my head back against the headrest. "You have got to be kidding me." "What?" Keaton asked, leaning back but keeping a hand on my knee. "Skunk. In a kitchen. Elm Street." I looked at him, misery written all over my face. "I have to go. That's my rent money for the month." Keaton looked at me, then at the phone, then back at me. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. He looked disappointed, frustrated, but then he smiled. It was a crooked, resigned smile. "Kitchen skunk," he repeated. "It's a high-priority varmint," I said apologetically. "I am so sorry, Keaton. This night, I ruined it." "You didn't ruin anything," he said firmly. He started the truck engine. "We're going." "We? You think I'm letting you tackle a kitchen skunk alone in that dress?" He put the truck in gear, glancing over at me with a smirk that promised retribution for the interrupted kiss later. "Besides, I'm already invested. Let's go park some pests." I watched him drive, the city lights playing over his profile. My body was still humming, my lips still burning from his kiss. My life was a chaotic mess of wild animals and bad timing. But as we sped toward the skunk crisis, with Keaton Rhodes beside me, I realized I wouldn't trade the chaos for anything. "Okay," I said, grinning as I kicked off my heels. "But if you get sprayed, you're riding in the truck bed." "Deal." The night was far from over, and for the first time in a long time, the disaster ahead felt like an adventure. The interior of Keaton's truck smelled like leather and the lingering, spicy scent of his cologne, but all I could focus on was the fact that I was barefoot, holding a pair of nude heels, and currently speeding toward a skunk intervention in a silk wrap dress. "You realize," I said, breaking the silence that was thick enough to spread on toast, "that this is the point in the movie where the audience screams at the screen. We were having a moment. A very good moment. And now we are going to a place that will inevitably smell like burning rubber and despair." Keaton kept his eyes on the road, but his hand drifted down to squeeze my knee. His thumb rubbed a slow, distracting circle against the inside of my thigh, sending a jolt of liquid heat straight to my core. "The moment isn't over, Sam," he said, his voice dropping to that low rumble that made my toes curl against the floor mat. "It's just paused. Think of this as foreplay. Extremely weird, hazardous foreplay. If you find skunks aphrodisiacal, we need to have a serious talk about your childhood." He chuckled, the sound vibrating through the seat. "I'm not interested in the skunk. I'm interested in watching you handle the skunk. Competence is sexy," I groaned, letting my head thump back against the headrest. My body was still humming from the kiss at the overlook. Every nerve ending felt exposed, raw, and desperate for his touch. The way he looked at me, like I was a meal he was planning to savor slowly, made it very difficult to care about the rodent crisis on Elm Street. I wanted to crawl over the center console and finish what we started, public indecency laws be damned. After grabbing my gear from my shop, we pulled up to the curb of a 2-story colonial that looked far too respectable for the chaos I knew was inside. The front door was flung open before the truck even came to a complete stop. A man in plaid pajama bottoms and a "World's Okayest Golfer" t-shirt stood on the porch, waving a spatula like he was surrendering to an invading army. "Oh, thank the heavens!" Mr. Henderson yelled as I hopped out of the truck, abandoning my heels on the floorboard. "It's in the pantry! It's eating the organic quinoa! Stay back!" I commanded, grabbing my catch pole and a heavy blanket from the back of the truck. Keaton was right behind me. He'd rolled up the sleeves of his dress shirt, exposing those devastating forearms that were quickly becoming my favorite landscape. "What's the play, coach?" Keaton asked, looking entirely too happy to be crashing a skunk party. "I go in low. You hold the flashlight. If the tail goes up, you run. Do not be a hero. A hero smells like tomato juice for a month. A coward smells like soap." We entered the kitchen. It was a disaster zone of spilled flour and overturned chairs. The pantry door was ajar, and from the darkness came the distinct sound of munching. I crept forward, the silk of my dress swishing softly around my legs. It was the most impractical outfit imaginable. I felt ridiculous, like a bridesmaid who had gotten lost on the way to the reception and decided to moonlight as a pest controller. Keaton moved with me. I could hear his breathing, slow and steady. He wasn't afraid. He was right there, his presence wrapping around me like a protective blanket. I peeked into the pantry. The skunk was there, sitting on a sack of potatoes, looking incredibly pleased with itself. "Okay," I whispered. "Here goes nothing." I lunged. The skunk, possessing the reflexes of a ninja, hissed and scrambled up the shelving unit. I swung the catchpole, missed, and hit a shelf of canned goods. A pyramid of chickpeas came crashing down. "Watch out!" Keaton yelled. He grabbed my waist, hauling me back against his chest just as a can of garbanzo beans dented the floor where my foot had been a second earlier. His grip was iron-hard, his chest heaving against my back. For a second, amidst the flying legumes and the angry wildlife, the world narrowed down to the sensation of his hips pressing into mine. The attraction was visceral, a sharp tug in my belly that had nothing to do with fear. The skunk, feeling cornered, turned its rear end toward us. The tail went up. "Drop!" I shrieked. Keaton didn't hesitate. He tackled me. We went down in a heap on the linoleum, Keaton twisting his body to shield mine. He took the brunt of the impact, his heavy frame covering me completely. The air filled with a mist that smelled like garlic, burning tires, and pure malice. We lay there for a heartbeat, Keaton's weight pressing me into the cold floor. His face was buried in the crook of my neck, his breath hot against my skin. Even with the skunk stench assaulting our nostrils, I could smell him, the underlying scent of man that drove me wild. My hands were trapped between our chests, resting on the hard wall of his pectorals. I could feel his heart hammering a frantic rhythm that matched my own. He lifted his head, his eyes dark and heavy-lidded, scanning my face. Did he get us? I sniffed tentatively. He missed the direct hit. We caught the fallout. We're in the splash zone, but we're not ground zero. He smirked, a wicked glint in his eyes. Good, because I really like this dress. He rolled off me, extending a hand to pull me up. I took it, my legs feeling like jelly. We managed to corral the now empty skunk into a cage using the blanket and a trail of cat food. I marched the offender out to the van while Mr. Henderson wept with gratitude on the porch. "Bill me!" he shouted. "Just take it away!" I secured the cage and turned to Keaton. We were standing in the driveway, under the street lamp. My dress was wrinkled and dusty, his shirt had a smudge of flour on the shoulder, and we both smelled faintly of skunk. It should have been the ultimate mood killer. It should have been the moment he realized Paul was right, that my life was too messy, too chaotic. Instead, Keaton walked over to me, grabbed the lapels of my dress, and pulled me against him hard. "You," he said, his voice rough, "are incredible." "I smell like a spicy tire fire," I argued, though my hands were already creeping up to grip his biceps. "I don't care." He kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It was a searing, desperate collision of mouths. He tasted like adrenaline and want. His hands roamed down my back, cupping my rear through the silk, pulling me so close I couldn't tell where I ended, and he began. The kiss consumed me, blotting out the smell, the job, the world. There was only the friction of his body, the heat of his tongue, and the overwhelming need to be closer. "My place," I gasped against his lips. "I have a hose and tomato juice. Lead the way." We drove back to my small bungalow in silence, but the air in the truck was electric. Every time he shifted in his seat, I felt it. The anticipation was a tight coil in my stomach. We didn't make it to the shower, we barely made it to the backyard. I turned on the garden hose, the water cool against the humid Kansas night. "Turn around," I ordered, picking up a bottle of special deskunking enzyme spray I kept for emergencies. Keaton stripped off his shirt. The moonlight hit his skin, highlighting the ridges of muscle on his back, the broad sweep of his shoulders. I swallowed hard, my mouth going dry. He was beautiful, not in a polished gym bro way, but in a functional, powerful way that spoke of lifting heavy ladders and carrying people out of burning buildings. I sprayed him down, my hands slicking the solution over his skin. He groaned as I rubbed the enzyme into his shoulders, leaning back into my touch. "My turn," he said, turning around. His eyes dropped to my dress. "That has to go." I didn't hesitate. I undid the wrap tie. The silk pooled at my feet. I stood there in my lace bra and panties, feeling exposed and empowered all at once. Keaton's gaze devoured me. His pupils were blown so wide his eyes looked black. The hunger in his expression made my knees weak. He took the hose. The water was cold, but his hands were hot. He washed the dust from my skin, his fingers tracing the line of my collarbone, the curve of my waist. It wasn't just cleaning, it was worship. "Sam," he whispered, dropping the hose to the grass. He stepped closer, his wet chest brushing against mine. "I'm crazy about you. You know that? Even with the skunks? Especially with the skunks." He picked me up, wrapping my legs around his waist. I buried my face in his wet neck, inhaling the scent of him, clean and wild. He carried me toward the back door, and for the first time in my life, I didn't worry about the mess. I didn't worry about the future. I just held on. 3 weeks passed in a blur of dopamine and disbelief. My life had transformed into a montage of rom-com cliches, but without the inevitable breakup scene. Keaton was perfect. He brought me coffee in the mornings. He helped me fix the suspension on the van. He didn't flinch when I brought home a box of orphaned baby squirrels. Instead, he named them. Paul had gone silent. No texts, no drive-bys. It was quiet. Too quiet. I was sitting in the Varmint Valet office, which was actually a converted shed in the backyard of a rental property I used for equipment storage, humming to myself as I organized invoices. I felt light, happy. Then the door opened. I spun around in my swivel chair, a smile ready on my lips, expecting Keaton with lunch. It wasn't Keaton. It was a man in a cheap suit holding a clipboard. "Samantha Malloy?" he asked, looking around the shed with a sneer that seemed practiced. "That's me," I said, the smile dying on my face. "Can I help you?" "If you have a raccoon problem, I'm booked until Thursday." "I'm not here for wildlife," he said, stepping inside and handing me a thick envelope. "I'm from the city zoning and code enforcement office." I took the envelope. It felt heavy, like a brick of bad news. "Code enforcement? I'm licensed. I have my permits." "Not for this structure," he said, tapping the clipboard. "And not for the operation of a commercial wildlife facility in a residential zone R2. I've been operating here for 5 years," I said, my voice rising. "My landlord knows. The city knows." "Well," the man said, offering a thin, unpleasant smile. "It was brought to our attention that there are several violations. Noise complaints, sanitation concerns, improper storage of hazardous biological materials." "Brought to your attention by who?" I demanded, though a cold knot of dread was already forming in my stomach. The man shrugged. "Anonymous tip." "But the law is the law, Ms. Malloy. You have 48 hours to cease operations and vacate the premises, or we will seize the assets, including the van." He turned and walked out, leaving the door swinging in the breeze. I stood there, frozen. 48 hours. Cease operations. This was my livelihood. This was everything I had built. I looked down at the envelope. On the back, in faint pencil, someone had written a reference number. But it wasn't the number that caught my eye. It was the scent wafting off the paper. It didn't smell like official government stationery. It smelled like expensive cloying cologne. It smelled like Paul. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Keaton. Keaton, bringing tacos. And maybe a ring. Key ring. "For the spare key to my place. Don't panic." I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. The universe wasn't just trying to pull us apart. It was trying to bulldoze my entire existence. Paul wasn't just jealous. He was nuking my life from orbit. I grabbed my keys and the eviction notice. "Okay, Paul," I whispered, the sadness in my chest hardening into a cold, diamond-sharp rage. "You want a war? You just poked the wrong badger. Rage is a funny thing. Sometimes it burns hot and fast, like a flash paper fire, and other times it sits in your gut like a swallowed bowling ball, heavy and cold." As I stared at the cease and desist order, I was currently experiencing a unique combination of both. I was a volcano capped with ice, and the lava was looking for a way out. The distinct scent of expensive, musk-heavy cologne wafting off the paper was the final insult. Paul didn't just want to ruin my business. He wanted me to know it was him. It was a signature, arrogant and unmistakable. The screen door of the shed creaked open, and the smell of seasoned beef and fresh cilantro momentarily warred with the scent of impending doom. "Order up," Keaton's voice rumbled, cheerful and completely unaware that he was walking into a demolition zone. I got 3 carnitas, 2 al pastor, and enough guacamole to drown a small badger. "I also come bearing gifts." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked at him, at the kindness I knew was etched into his rugged features, I was going to shatter. And I needed to be sharp. I needed to be jagged glass. "Sam?" The cheerfulness evaporated from his tone, replaced instantly by that low, alert timbre he used when a structure looked unstable. The floorboards creaked under his boots as he stepped closer. "What's wrong? You're vibrating." "I'm not vibrating," I snapped. though my hand clutching the clipboard was shaking so hard, the metal clip rattled. I'm calibrating my rage. I spun the chair around. Keaton stopped 3 feet away. He was wearing a gray t-shirt that hugged his chest like a second skin, the fabric strained across the broad expanse of his shoulders. His dark hair was a little messy, likely from the wind, and his eyes were warm brown pools that usually made my knees weak. Right now, though, looking at him just made the ache in my chest sharper. He was holding a grease-stained paper bag in one hand and a small, shiny key on a ring in the other. His gaze dropped to the clipboard in my hand, then snapped back to my face. He set the tacos on a stack of filing cabinets with deliberate care. Talk to me, Sam. Who do I need to hit? The city of Wichita, I said, my voice tight. Specifically, the Zoning and Code Enforcement Division. But really, it's Paul. It's always Paul. I shoved the clipboard at him. He took it, his large hand brushing mine. Even in my state of fury, the contact sent a jolt of electricity zapping up my arm. It was a traitorous reaction. Keaton scanned the document. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering near his ear. His eyes narrowed, the golden flecks and the brown darkening as his pupils dilated. He didn't just look annoyed, he looked lethal. 48 hours? He growled. This is bullshit. You have permits. I've seen them taped to the wall over the mini-fridge. Apparently, my shed is an illegal commercial structure, and I am a blight on the neighborhood. I stood up, pacing the small length of the room. He called it in. An anonymous tip. He's trying to suffocate me, Keaton. He thinks if he takes away the van and the shed, I'll have to crawl back to him and ask for a job as a receptionist. Keaton tossed the clipboard onto the desk with a clatter. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and grabbed my upper arms. His grip was firm, grounding me when I felt like I was about to spin off into orbit. The heat from his palm seeped through my shirt, branding me. He's not winning this, Keaton said, his voice rough and deep. We fight it. I know guys at the station who know guys at City Hall. We get an extension, we file an appeal. There's no time for an appeal. I pulled away, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't think when he was touching me. They're coming to seize the assets in 2 days. That includes the van. Without the van, I can't work. Without work, I can't pay the fines. It's a death spiral. Then we move the assets, Keaton said, stepping into my space again. He was relentless, a force of nature that refused to be deterred. Pack it up, bring the gear to my place. Park the van in my garage. Let them try to seize it from a firefighter's property. I looked up at him, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He was offering me a sanctuary. He was offering to intertwine his life with my chaotic, fur-covered mess. And that terrified me more than the eviction notice. I can't ask you to do that, I whispered. This is my fight, my mess. If I drag you into this legal swamp, Paul will come after you too. He's petty, Keaton. He's nuclear-level petty. Let him come, Keaton said, his eyes burning with an intensity that stole the air from my lungs. He reached out, his knuckles grazing my cheekbone. The tenderness of the gesture was at odds with the fierce set of his mouth. I don't care about Paul, I care about you. We're a team, Sam. You handle the raccoon end, I handle the heavy lifting. That's the deal. I wanted to say yes, I wanted to sink into his arms and let him handle it. But the ghost of every lecture Paul had ever given me about being too much and a liability echoed in my ears. I need to fix this, I said, grabbing my keys off the desk. My way. Where are you going? Keaton asked, stepping between me and the door. He loomed over me, broad and imposing, but he didn't try to physically stop me. To the source, I said, putting on my best. Don't mess with the badger face. I'm going to pay Paul a visit. I'm driving, he stated. It wasn't a question. Keaton, I'm driving, Sam. Or you're not going. You're angry, you're adrenaline dumping, and the last time you drove in this state, you backed over a recycling bin. Get in the truck. I glared at him. He glared back, crossing his arms over that magnificent chest. Fine, I hissed. But if you try to punch him, I'm not bailing you out. No promises. The drive to Paul's office was tense. The air inside Keaton's truck was thick with unsaid words and palpable aggression. Keaton drove with one hand on the wheel, his knuckles white. His other hand rested on the center console, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Every time he shifted gears, his arm brushed mine, and the friction sent sparks skittering across my nerves. Paul worked at Williams & Associates, a boutique insurance firm located in a glass monstrosity downtown. The lobby smelled like money and lemon pledge. I marched in, wearing my cargo shorts, combat boots, and a t-shirt that said, "Keep calm and carry a catch pole." I looked like a feral cat that had wandered into a dog show. Keaton walked beside me, his presence heavy and menacing. In his dark t-shirt and jeans, he looked like the kind of trouble security guards were trained to avoid. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, eyeing my boots with disdain. "I'm here to see Paul Williams," I said. "Tell him his past is here to haunt him. Mr. Williams is in a meeting." I didn't wait. I knew where his office was. I strode past the desk, ignoring the receptionist's squawk of protest. Keaton was right on my heels, acting as a human shield against any potential interference. I threw open the double glass doors to Paul's corner office. Paul was sitting behind a desk made of mahogany that was probably endangered. He was laughing at something on his phone. When he looked up and saw me, the laugh died, replaced by a smug, oily smile that made my skin crawl. "Samantha," he said, not standing up, "to what do I owe the pleasure? Finally decided to sell the scrap metal you call a van?" "Cut the crap, Paul." I slammed the eviction notice onto his pristine desk blotter. "You called code enforcement." Paul picked up the paper with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Though, as a concerned citizen, I have noticed that your little shack is an eyesore. It brings down property values. I'm sure the neighbors are relieved." "The neighbors love me," I spat. "I removed a copperhead from Mrs. Higgins' garden last week. This is you being a vindictive weasel because I wouldn't go to dinner with you." Keaton stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. He just moved into the light, his shadow falling over Paul's desk. Paul shrank back slightly, his eyes darting to Keaton's biceps. "You're playing a dangerous game, little man," Keaton said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder before a tornado. "Harassment is a crime. This isn't harassment," Paul said, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. "This is tough love. Sam needs a wake-up call. She's playing in the dirt when she could have a real life." He looked at me, his eyes pleading in that manipulative way that used to work. "Sam, look at yourself. You're with a laborer. You're smelling like wet dog. I can make this go away. I know the zoning commissioner. Just say the word. Sell the business, let me help you find a position here, and the eviction disappears." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the silence of a trap snapping shut. I looked at Paul, really looked at him. I saw the fear behind the arrogance. I saw a small, controlling man who couldn't stand that I was happy without him. And then I looked at Keaton. He was standing there, ready to tear the building down for me. He didn't want to change me. He helped me wash skunk spray off my skin at midnight. He brought me tacos when my world was ending. The choice wasn't even a choice. I leaned over the desk, planting my hands on the mahogany. "Paul," I said, my voice deadly calm. "I would rather live in a dumpster with a family of rabid badgers than spend 5 minutes working for you. You want a war? Fine. But you forgot one thing." "And what's that?" Paul sneered. "I catch predators for a living. And you're just a rat in a suit." I snatched the eviction notice back. "Come on, Keaton. We have packing to do." I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. I felt Keaton behind me, his solid presence protecting my retreat. We made it to the elevator before my knees gave out. I slumped against the metal wall as the doors slid shut. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving me shaky and nauseous. I slid down until I was crouching on the floor, head in my hands. "I don't have a plan," I whispered to the floor. "I talked big, but I have nowhere to put the cages. The chemicals have to be stored in a temperature-controlled environment. I'm screwed." Keaton crouched in front of me. The elevator was small, and suddenly he was everywhere. His knees bracketed mine. He reached out and took my hands, pulling them away from my face. "You're not screwed," he said firmly. "You have me." "Keaton, I can't." "Sam, shut up for a second." He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was fierce and possessive, fueled by the anger of the confrontation and the desperate need to prove that we were alive, that we were together. His mouth devoured mine, hot and demanding. I tasted his fury and his desire, a potent cocktail that went straight to my head. My hands gripped the front of his shirt, pulling him closer. I needed his strength. I needed the solid reality of him to anchor me. He groaned low in his throat, his hands sliding around to cup the back of my neck, holding me in place as he deepened the kiss. The friction of his stubble against my chin, the heat of his breath, the hard wall of his chest pressing against me, it was overwhelming. For a moment, the eviction didn't matter. Paul didn't matter. There was only this, the electric, visceral pull between us that felt like gravity. The elevator dinged. We broke apart, breathing heavily. My lips felt swollen, my heart racing. He ran a thumb over my lower lip, his gaze dropping to my mouth before snapping back to my eyes. "We're going to my place," he said, his voice raspy. "We're moving the van. We're moving the cages. My garage is heated. It's up to code. And if Paul sends an inspector, I'll introduce them to my German shepherd." "You don't have a German shepherd," I said breathlessly. "I'll borrow one. I know people." He stood up and pulled me to my feet. He didn't let go of my hand. "We are doing this, Sam. You are not losing your dream because of that prick." I squeezed his hand back. The fear was still there, lurking at the edges, but the panic was gone. "Okay," I said. "Let's go pack." The next 6 hours were a blur of physical labor that would have made a CrossFit instructor weep. We drove back to the shed and began the systematic dismantling of Varmint Valet. It was heartbreaking work. Every cage I collapsed, every box of invoices I taped shut felt like a failure. But Keaton was a machine. He moved with an efficiency that was mesmerizing to watch. He lifted the heavy steel traps as if they were made of balsa wood, the muscles in his arms cording and flexing with every movement. Sweat soaked through his gray t-shirt, turning it dark and clinging to his torso, highlighting the ridges of his back. Despite the circumstances, I found myself pausing just to watch him. He wiped his forehead with the back of a gloved hand, leaving a smear of dirt on his temple. He caught me staring and flashed a grin that was equal parts exhaustion and reassurance. "Enjoying the show?" he teased, hoisting a crate of catch poles. "Just inspecting the equipment?" I shot back, forcing a smile, making sure it's sturdy. "It's built to last, babe." The endearment slipped out so casually, I don't think he even noticed, but it hit me right in the chest. Babe. It sounded nice. It sounded permanent. By midnight, the shed was empty. My entire livelihood was packed into the back of my van and the bed of Keaton's truck. We looked at the hollow space, the dust motes dancing in the beam of our flashlights. "It looks so small," I whispered. Keaton came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. He pulled me back against his chest, resting his chin on top of my head. I leaned into him, letting his warmth seep into my aching bones. "It's just a shed, Sam," he murmured into my hair. "The business isn't the building, it's you. It's your crazy brain, and your refusal to let a skunk win. We'll set up at my place, it'll be better. Plus, my coffee maker actually works." I turned in his arms, looking up at him. We were both filthy, covered in dust and sweat. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and technically homeless in a business sense. But looking at him, I felt a surge of hope. "Thank you," I said softly, "for the heavy lifting. And the tacos. And the elevator kiss." He smirked, his eyes darkening. "We can revisit the tacos and the kiss. The lifting I'm done with for the night." He leaned down, and this time the kiss was slow, tender, and filled with a promise that terrified and thrilled me. It was a promise that he wasn't going anywhere. "Let's go home," he said against my lips. "Yeah," I agreed, realizing with a jolt that I wasn't thinking about my apartment. "Let's go home." We locked the shed for the last time. As we walked to the trucks, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a taunt from Paul. It wasn't Paul. It was a notification from the frantic manager of the Wichita Ritz-Carlton. Text. Urgent. Wedding tomorrow. Pigeons in the ballroom. Bride is hysterical. Name your price. I looked at Keaton. He was unlocking his truck, looking back at me with a question in his eyes. Problem? Pigeons, I said, a slow grin spreading across my face. At the Ritz. Emergency rates. Keaton laughed, shaking his head. Only you, Sam. Only you. Hey, I shrugged, climbing into the van. If I'm going to pay legal fees to fight Paul, I need that pigeon money. Follow me? To the ends of the earth, he called back. Or, at least, to the Ritz. I started the engine. The Varmint Valet was mobile, bruised, but very much alive. Paul had tried to ground me, but he forgot one crucial detail about working with wildlife. When you corner a creature, it doesn't just give up. It fights. And now, I wasn't fighting alone. If dignity is a currency, I was currently overdrawn at the bank of self-respect. It was 2 a.m. I was standing in the center of the Crystal Ballroom at the Wichita Ritz-Carlton, wearing cargo shorts that had seen better decades, and a t-shirt covered in shed dust. Beside me stood Keaton, looking like a Greek god who had decided to slum it in a moving crew, holding a net gun with the casual familiarity most men hold a remote control. Perched on the crystal chandelier above us were 3 pigeons who had decided that the upcoming nuptials of the Henderson-Smythe merger needed a little avian contribution. Okay, I whispered, angling my flashlight beam at the crystals. The bride wants them out alive. Apparently, dead birds are bad luck, but live ones defecating on the cake table is just rustic charm. Keaton chuckled, a low, vibrating sound that I felt in the soles of my boots. He stepped closer, his arm brushing mine. The contact sent a jolt of electricity zapping straight up my shoulder and settling heavy and hot in my stomach. Even exhausted, covered in grime and staring down poultry, the magnetic pull of this man was strong enough to derail a train. "You flush," he murmured, his breath stirring the hair at my temple. "I'll catch. You sure you know how to use that thing?" He turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto mine. The intensity of his gaze made my breath hitch. He looked at me with a hunger that had nothing to do with the late hour and everything to do with the fact that we hadn't properly finished what we started in the elevator. "Sam," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly register that made my insides liquefy, "I aim for what I want. And I don't miss." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Right. Pigeons. Let's focus on the pigeons." I grabbed a telescoping pole and gave the chandelier a gentle nudge. The birds took flight in a panic of gray feathers and cooing. Keaton moved. It was poetry in motion. He didn't scramble, he flowed. He tracked the lead bird, pivoted on his heel, and fired the net gun. A soft thwomp echoed in the cavernous room, and the bird was gently ensnared, fluttering safely down to the carpet. He reloaded with a speed that was frankly terrifying and sexy in equal measure. Within 5 minutes, all 3 birds were secure in travel cages. The hotel manager, a man who looked like he ironed his socks, handed me a check with trembling fingers. It was enough to cover my legal fees and keep me in tacos for a month. We walked out to the truck in the cool night air. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. But the hum between us was still there, a live wire crackling in the silence. Keaton tossed the gear into the back of his truck and turned to me. He leaned against the tailgate, crossing those massive arms over his chest. The street lamp cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw and the heavy grandeur of his shoulders. So he said, "We have the money, we have the van, we have the cages, now we just need to get you settled." "Your garage isn't exactly a guest suite," I said, trying to ignore the way my heart was hammering against my ribs. "The garage is for the business," he corrected. He reached out, his hand wrapping around the nape of my neck. His thumb stroked the sensitive skin behind my ear, sending shivers cascading down my spine. "You are staying in the house. With me?" The implication hung in the air, heavy and promising. I looked up at him, seeing the raw need etched into his features. He wasn't asking for a roommate. He was staking a claim. "Okay," I whispered. He didn't smile. He just stared at my mouth like it was the only source of water in a desert. Then he opened the passenger door. "Get in." A week passed in a blur of domestic intimacy that terrified me more than any rabid coyote ever could. Living with Keaton Rhodes was an education in sensory overload. The man took up space. His boots by the door, his scent, fresh rain, and warm skin, clinging to the throw pillows, the sheer size of him filling the kitchen when he made coffee in the morning. It should have been awkward. My business was currently operating out of his detached garage, which now smelled faintly of skunk neutralizer and bleach. My boxes were stacked in his living room. But instead of awkward, it was effortless. And the nights. Good grief, the nights. We hadn't slept apart since the move. Waking up wrapped in Keaton's arms, his heavy leg thrown over mine, his chest pressing against my back, had become my new favorite addiction. We fell into a rhythm that felt dangerous, because it felt so permanent, but the universe, having noticed I was happy, decided it was time to intervene. It was Tuesday evening. I was in the garage, sanitizing traps and trying not to think about how much I owed Keaton, when I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked out, expecting to see Keaton returning from his shift. Instead, I saw a courier van. The driver handed me a thick envelope. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to firefighter Keaton Rhodes. I stared at the return address. City of Wichita, Ethics and Internal Affairs Review Board. My stomach dropped to my toes. I didn't open it. That was a line I wouldn't cross, but I knew what it was. I could feel the malice radiating off the cardstock. Keaton's truck pulled in 10 minutes later. He hopped out, looking tired but happy, still wearing his Navy Station t-shirt that hugged his biceps in all the right places. He saw me standing there, holding the letter like it was a live grenade, and his smile faltered. "Sam?" He walked over, stripping off his sunglasses. "What's wrong? You look like you saw a ghost." "Not a ghost," I said, my voice trembling. "Just a demon in a beige suit." I handed him the envelope. He tore it open, scanning the contents. His face went blank, a mask of stone settling over his features. The muscle in his jaw jumped. Once. Twice. "What does it say?" I asked, though I already knew. "It's a formal inquiry," Keaton said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Regarding the unauthorized use of a private residence for a commercial enterprise involving hazardous biological materials. They're citing a conflict of interest and potential violation of the department's code of conduct." "Paul?" I whispered. The name tasted like ash. "He's not just coming after me anymore, he's coming after your job." Keaton crumpled the letter in his fist. "He's trying to scare us. He's succeeding." I paced away from him, running a hand through my hair. "Keaton, this is your career. You love that job. I can't be the reason you get suspended. Or fired." "I'm not getting fired. You don't know that. Paul knows people. He plays golf with the commissioner. He's weaving a net, and I dragged you right into the middle of it." The guilt was a physical pain, sharp and suffocating. "I should go. I'll move the van to a storage unit. I'll sleep in the back. I can't let him hurt you to get to me." I turned toward the garage, intent on packing, but I didn't get 2 steps. Keaton was there. He grabbed my arm, spinning me around. He backed me up until my back hit the siding of the garage, caging me in with his body. "Stop," he growled. "Keaton, let me go." "Number." He pressed his hips against mine, the hard ridge of his desire evident even through his jeans. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his eyes burning with a fierce, dark light. "You are not running. You run into burning buildings to save kittens, Sam. You climb roofs to fight raccoons. You don't run from a petty little man with a Napoleon complex. He's threatening your livelihood." "He's threatening us," Keaton corrected, his voice rough. "And I don't take kindly to threats." He brought one hand up to cup my face, his thumb tracing the line of my lower lip. The sensation sent a shockwave through my body, making my knees weak. I leaned into his touch, hating how much I needed him, hating how good he felt against me. "We have a play," he said softly. "We do? The firefighters' charity gala is tomorrow night." I blinked. "The fancy ball? The one where people wear clothes that don't have cargo pockets?" "The one where Paul Williams is a platinum sponsor," Keaton said, a wicked glint entering his eyes. "He's gonna be there, shaking hands, pretending he's a pillar of the community. He thinks he's beaten us. He thinks I'm gonna hide at home, afraid of an inquiry, and that you're gonna fold. And instead, Keaton leaned in, his lips brushing my ear, sending shivers racing down my skin. "We walk in the front door, together. We look happy. We look untouchable. And I introduce my girlfriend, the successful business owner, to the chief, the mayor, and everyone Paul is trying to impress." "Girlfriend?" I breathed. He pulled back, searching my eyes. "Yeah, unless you object to the title." My heart did a triple Lutz. "I don't object. But Keaton, I don't have a dress. I don't have class. I have a lingering scent of pine shavings." "You have more class in your little finger than Paul has in his entire overpriced wardrobe," he said firmly. "We are going to that gala. We are going to look him in the eye. And we are going to show him that he can't burn us down." And then he kissed me. 24 hours later, I was standing in front of Keaton's full-length mirror, staring at a stranger. We had spent the morning raiding a high-end consignment shop, fueled by spite and Keaton's credit card, which he insisted on using, threatening to feed me to the raccoons if I argued. The dress was midnight blue velvet, sleek and dangerous. It hugged every curve, dropping scandalously low in the back and slitting high up the thigh. It was a dress that said, "I kill pests for a living, but I look good doing it." My red hair had been tamed into sleek, glossy waves, and for once, my makeup wasn't just a smudge of dirt. Keaton stepped into the room behind me. I stopped breathing. If firefighter Keaton was hot, Tuxedo Keaton was a 5-alarm emergency. The black suit was tailored to perfection, emphasizing the width of his shoulders and the taper of his waist. The crisp white shirt contrasted with his tanned skin, and he had tied the bow tie himself, leaving it just slightly imperfect in a way that was devastatingly charming. He met my eyes in the mirror. He stopped dead, his hands freezing in the act of adjusting his cuffs. His gaze traveled up my legs, lingered on the curve of my hips, and finally landed on my face. The look in his eyes was visceral, a raw, unadulterated hunger that made the air in the room thick and heavy. I saw his throat work as he swallowed. "Sam," he rasped. "Too much?" I asked nervously, smoothing the velvet over my hip. He crossed the room in 3 strides. He didn't speak. He just spun me around and pulled me flush against him. The friction of the velvet against his fine wool suit was exquisite. I felt the heat of his body seeping through the layers, branding me. He lowered his head, his nose brushing against my neck, inhaling deeply. "If we weren't on a mission," he growled against my skin, his voice sending vibrations straight to my core, "we wouldn't make it out the door." "We can be late," I offered weakly, my fingers itching to undo his bow tie. He pulled back, his eyes dark with promise. Later. Tonight is about sending a message. But later? He let the sentence hang, the thread of pleasure heavy in the silence. Let's go scare a bully, I said, straightening his lapel. The grand ballroom of the Hyatt Regency was dripping with crystal and self-importance. A string quartet played something vaguely recognizable in the corner, struggling to be heard over the murmur of Wichita's elite. I gripped Keaton's arm as we walked in. My heels sank slightly into the plush carpet. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to find a vent to crawl into, to locate the nearest exit. But Keaton was a solid rock beside me, his warmth radiating through his suit jacket. Chin up, he murmured. You hunt predators. These people are just prey with better jewelry. We moved through the crowd. Keaton was greeted warmly by other firefighters, clapping shoulders and shaking hands. I was introduced as Samantha, owner of Varmint Valet, and to my surprise, people didn't recoil. They laughed at my stories. The mayor actually asked for my card because he had a mole problem on the 9th green. And then, the sea of black tuxedos parted. Paul stood near the bar, holding a martini glass like a scepter. He was holding court with 2 city council members and, oh no, Chief Miller, Keaton's boss. Paul looked up and saw us. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. He looked at Keaton, tall and commanding in his tux. He looked at me, in the dress that cost more than his car payments. The smug superiority cracked, revealing the panicked little man beneath. He whispered something to the chief, gesturing frantically toward us. Keaton didn't flinch. He steered us straight toward them. Evening, Paul, Keaton said, his voice smooth and dangerous. Chief. Chief Miller looked from Paul to Keaton. He was a stern man with a mustache that demanded respect, and right now, his expression was unreadable. Rhodes, the chief grunted. Ms. Malloy, you two clean up nice. Thank you, Chief, I said, keeping my voice steady, though I miss my boots. Paul let out a high, nervous laugh. Yes, well, playing dress-up is fun for everyone. Chief, as I was saying, about the internal matter regarding Officer Rhodes' living situation, Keaton stepped forward, cutting off Paul's oxygen supply with sheer presence. I think the chief has more important things to do at HR. Keaton stepped forward, cutting off Paul's oxygen supply with sheer presence. I think the chief has more important things to do at a charity gala than discuss my roommate, Paul. Roommate? Paul scoffed, his eyes darting around to see who was watching. Running an illegal business out of a city employee's residence is hardly just a roommate situation. It's a liability. It's handled, Chief Miller interrupted. His voice was a baritone gavel. Paul blinked. Excuse me? The chief took a sip of his drink, eyeing Paul with a look usually reserved for a hydrant that wouldn't open. I received your complaint, Mr. Williams, and the subsequent inquiry from Internal Affairs. I also received a call from the mayor 10 minutes ago telling me how charming Ms. Malloy is and how she's handling the city's pest problems with zero cost to the taxpayer. I stifled a gasp. The mayor? Furthermore, the chief continued, turning his gaze to Keaton, Rhodes here is my best lieutenant. If he wants to house a few raccoons in his off hours, as long as they aren't driving the truck, I don't give a damn. The inquiry is closed. Paul's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. He looked at me, desperation warring with fury in his eyes. He realized, in that moment, that his leverage was gone. He had pulled the strings, and they had snapped. This is ridiculous, Paul sputtered. You're choosing a bug catcher over a platinum sponsor? I'm choosing my team, the chief said simply. He turned his back on Paul. Rhodes, save me a dance with the lady. Keaton grinned, a sharp, victorious expression. Yes, sir. Paul stood there, isolated in the middle of the crowded room. He looked small. He looked defeated. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I just felt done. Goodbye, Paul, I said softly. We walked away, leaving him standing in the wake of our victory. Keaton pulled me onto the dance floor. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me close until there was no air between us. We swayed to the music, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly morphing into something hotter, heavier. You did good, he whispered against my temple. We did good, I corrected. I looked up at him, my heart full to bursting. So, does this mean I can keep the garage? You can keep the garage, he said, his eyes darkening as he looked at my mouth. On one condition. What's that? You let me take you home right now. Because if I have to spend another 10 minutes in this suit without kissing you, I'm going to pull the fire alarm. I laughed, the sound bubbling up from a place of pure joy. Firefighter Rhodes, I think that's against protocol. I write the protocol, he murmured, his hand sliding lower on my back, pressing me intimately against him. Let's go. We headed for the exit, hand in hand. The night was ours. Paul was in the rearview mirror. and for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was just ready to catch it. 6 months later, the world had settled into a new, terrifyingly wonderful normal. Varmint Valet was officially back in business, operating out of a newly zoned and inspected garage that Keaton and his station buddies had helped reinforce. It turns out, when the fire chief tells the zoning board to back off, they listen. Paul Williams had faded into the background like a bad stain treated with bleach. Rumor had it he was transferring to a branch in Omaha. I didn't care enough to confirm it. He belonged to a life I didn't recognize anymore. I was currently in the kitchen, trying to teach Keaton's new rescue dog, a 3-legged pit bull named Tripod, that my boots were not chew toys. "Drop it," I commanded. Tripod wagged his tail and chewed faster. The back door opened, and Keaton walked in. He was fresh from a shift, smelling of smoke and soap. He stopped in the doorway, watching me wrestle the boot away from the dog. "I think he's winning," Keaton observed, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. The sunlight caught the dark waves of his hair, and the sight of him made my heart do that stupid, wonderful flutter it hadn't stopped doing since the gala. "He has a distinct advantage," I panted, finally retrieving the boot. "He's cute, and he knows it." Keaton pushed off the doorframe and walked over to me. He took the boot from my hand and tossed it onto the counter, then wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me into the hard wall of his chest. "Speaking of cute," he murmured, dropping a kiss on my nose. "I have something for you. Tacos?" I asked hopefully. "Better." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart stopped. I froze, staring at the box. "Keaton, is that?" He chuckled, the sound vibrating against my ribs. "Relax, Sam. It's not a diamond." "Not yet. I know you. You'd probably lose a diamond in a gopher hole within a week." He flipped the box open. Inside sat a shiny silver key on a keyring shaped like a raccoon. I looked from the key to him, confused. "I already have a key to the house." "This isn't for the house," he said, his eyes turning serious, warm, and deep like melted chocolate. "This is for the new commercial unit downtown. The one with the climate-controlled storage and the office that isn't a shed." My mouth fell open. "The old brick building on Douglas?" "Keaton, that place is expensive." "It's an investment," he said firmly. "I put the down payment on it this morning. It's in both our names." "But why?" "Because Varmint Valet is going places," he said, tucking a stray curl behind my ear. His fingers lingered on my jaw, his thumbs stroking my skin. The tenderness in his touch made my throat tight. "And because I want to invest in you. In us. You handle the critters, I handle the infrastructure. Partners." I stared at him, tears pricking the corners of my eyes. Paul had spent years trying to shrink me, to make me fit into a box that was too small and too clean. Keaton had just bought me a bigger box so I could be exactly who I was, mess and all. "Partners," I whispered. "There's one catch?" he added, a playful glint entering his eyes. "There's always a catch. You have to promise not to bring any more badgers into the bedroom." "Tripod is getting jealous?" I laughed, throwing my arms around his neck. "I can make that promise, mostly." He kissed me then, lifting me off my feet. It was a kiss that tasted of coffee and promise, and a future that was bright and chaotic and absolutely perfect. His mouth moved over mine with a familiarity that thrilled me, a deep, possessive claim that I never wanted to escape. I felt the rough slide of his tongue, the heat of his hands gripping my thighs, the solid beat of his heart against mine. I pulled back breathless, resting my forehead against his. "You know," I said, grinning at him, "you're pretty handy to have around. For a ladder guy." "And you're not bad yourself," he countered, his voice rough with emotion. "For a raccoon girl." Outside, the Kansas sky was a brilliant, endless blue. My van was parked in the driveway, next to his truck. The dog was chewing my boot again. My life was messy, unpredictable, and occasionally smelled like skunk. But as Keaton carried me toward the living room, kicking the door shut behind us with his foot, I knew one thing for certain. I was finally exactly where I was supposed to be. Parked. Permanently.